What is going on, guys? Welcome to this Python tutorial series for intermediates. In today's episode, we're going to talk about database programming in Python. Now, databases are one of the most important and most popular way to store data in computer science. And in today's video, we're going to focus on how to implement database programming in Python. Notice that we're not going to talk too much about database structure itself. We're not going to talk too much about SQL because, for databases, most of them use the structured query language called SQL, which is basically what it means, structured query language. But we're not going to get too deep into that, so you either should know something about SQL or not care too much about it. We're only going to discuss how to do this in Python. Of course, I'm going to use SQL code, but you don't necessarily need to understand it. However, it's quite simple to understand because it's almost plain English. So let us get into the code. Now, the basic database that we use in Python is called SQLite 3. Of course, there are also modules for MySQL or MongoDB and so on, but for this video, we're going to focus on SQLite 3. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import SQLite 3. Now, to work with databases, we first need to create a database. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a connection to a database. This connection works in the following way. If there is a database with that name, we're going to work with offline file databases. We're not going to connect to an online database now. So if this database already exists, it's going to connect to it. And if it does not exist, it's going to create a new one. So we're going to create a connection object. And this connection object will be the result of the method connect, so SQLite3.connect. Now, SQLite3.connect returns us a connection, and we have to specify what we're going to connect to. So in this case, this would be the database name. I'm going to call it mydata.db. You can call it whatever you want. And you'll see that when I run this module right now, nothing happens, but on my desktop, I get a new file called mydata.db. And when I click on the properties, you can see it's a database file. So this is now our database. It's empty. There's nothing in it, but it's like the database created. And when I run the script again, of course, again, nothing happens, but it connects to the database. So we don't get an error. The second thing that we need now is a so-called cursor, because we now have the database, but to execute SQL queries, we need to have a so-called cursor, which allows us, it's more or less the object or the interface to the database. So every time we want to execute something, we need to use that cursor. And to get that cursor, we just say cursor equals connection dot cursor. We get the cursor for this connection. And that's basically it. That's the setup that we need to work with the database, and everything from now is, or almost everything from now on, is pure SQL. So, for example, the first thing that I would do is to create a new table, because a database is structured in tables, and every table has rows and columns. So let's just go ahead and create a new table in this database. What I can do for this is I write cursor.execute, and execute is the method that we're going to use to execute a query or a statement in SQL. So I'm going to define a multi-line string here so that it's a little bit more readable. And I'm going to say create table. And let's say I create a persons table. I want to have a table of different people, of different persons. So I'm going to say create table persons. And then I have to use parentheses here and specify the columns. So I'm going to say, okay, every person has a first name, which is of the data type text. So this would be the string in SQL. Of course, I can also use a different data type for string. For example, this one here, var char or varchar 32, which is variable character. Of the length 32, but I'm going to just use text here because it's only for demonstration purposes. Then we also have a last name, also a text, and then we have an age, for example, integer. This time in SQL we need to write a full word integer. Actually, I don't know if we need to, but we can. We don't have to write int. At least in Python we have the int keyword. Here we can write integer. And this is basically our statement. This creates a new table, an empty table, with 3 columns. So I can just execute this, but before I run the script here, everything that you execute does not actually get applied until you commit. So what you have to do is the cursor executes the statement, and the statement is more or less in the connection, but to really apply it to the database, to really commit it to the database, we need to say connection.commit. And then, of course, every time in the end, I should close the connection because this is what we do with connections. So run module, and of course we don't see anything, but what happens when I run the script one more time is we get an error message because we once created this database and this table, sorry, and it says table persons already exist. Because we created the table, it got saved in a database, then we load the database and try to create this table again, but this table already exists, so we get an error message. Now we could also counteract this by just saying create table if not exists. I think this should work. And then we don't get an error. Now what we can now do is we can insert data into this table. We have now a database with an empty table, and now what we can do is we can execute another statement that inserts some data into this table. So what I can do is I can say cursor.execute and a multi-line string here, and just say insert into persons values, and then I pass parentheses here with the values. So I can say the first person is Paul Smith, and he's 24 years old. Then I can say, I don't know, Mark, and Mark's name is Johnson, and he's 42 years old. And then we have Anna, and Anna is also called Smith, and she is 34 years old. So these have the same last name, and these are the values that we put into our table. So we insert these values here, these entries, these rows, or these persons into the table persons. So when I run this, we're not going to see anything, but we also don't get any errors, so it probably worked. And to now see the result, what we can do is we can make a third statement that selects these rows or these objects, these persons out of the table. So we want to print them out onto the screen. So what I can do is I can say cursor.execute, and then I say select. By the way, all this green code here, all these statements are SQL code if you haven't noticed yet. So it's not Python, we're just passing SQL statements. So I say select everything, this is how you select everything from persons, and then we specify a condition. We say where last name equals, and then I say Smith. So in this case, what we're trying to get here is all the persons, every value from, so all columns from every row where the last name is Smith. So we're not only interested in the first name, the last name, or the age, we're interested in all three values, but only of those people who have the last name Smith. So to get the results now, I say results, or actually I can say rows, because this is what you do in the database world. You oftentimes refer to this as rows. And the rows would be just the connection, or actually, I'm not sure if you have to say cursor.fetch all or connection fetch all, but I think cursor, and then we print the rows. Yeah, it was cursor, but why did it do that 5 times? It's actually right, but it's, oh, I know why, because I executed the script way too often, of course, because I inserted the same values over and over again. But when I create a new database, we get the two rows, Paul Smith, 24 years old, and Anna Smith, 34 years old. We didn't get all the rows because Mark's last name is Johnson, so we filtered out the two entries where the last name is Smith. Now, what we could do now is we could combine object-oriented programming with database programming. So we have these person entries in our database, and what we could try to do is we could try to load these database entries into our script as objects and the other way around. So we create objects in our script, person objects in our script, and then we load these objects to the database in form of a database row entry. And to do that, what I have to do here, or what we have to do here, is to create a class person with a constructor, as we already know how to do that. So first name, last name, and age. I'm going to use first and last so that we don't have to type too much. And then just say self dot first equals first, just a basic constructor. And when we have the constructor, we can now specify or define a method which loads a person from the table and converts it into a Python object. So we can say load person. And now we have to think about it. How do we want to load that person? Because in this case, which you will never find a database like that, in this case, we don't really have a primary key. We don't have a unique identifier, because in databases, you always have something like an ID or social security number, or the combination of name, age, and last name or birthday or something like that. In this case, we can have many people with the same first name, with the same last name, with the same age. So it's not really that perfect, but we could just go ahead and define a new ID here. So ID would be an integer and a primary key. And this would be unique then, of course. So I could also specify an ID here, but I have to call it a different name because ID is a keyword in Python. Let's just say number for now, or ID number. And then I say self.ID number equals ID number. Now what I could do is I could just say self and the ID number that needs to be passed. And then we could go ahead and load the person that has this ID. So we could just execute, of course, we have to define the cursor up here so that we can use it. Or actually, it doesn't work that way because we need a cursor defined in the class. So I have to specify everything in the class here as an object, maybe. So self dot, actually, let's do it like that. Self dot connection equals connection, and self dot cursor equals cursor. And then what I do is I just say cursor dot execute, and I execute a select statement. So the select statement would be select everything of the person, so from persons, where the ID equals, and then a placeholder, format ID number. Yeah, basically that. And then I get the results, of course. So the results would be cursor dot, and this time we're going to use fetch one. So we're not going to say fetch all. We don't get a list of tuples. We get a tuple of the first element. So if we have, which is impossible in this case, but if we have a or if we have multiple entries with the same ID, we would get only the first one. But in this case, we have only one entry, or a maximum of one entry, because it's a primary key, and a primary key is unique. So I get the results here from fetch one, and then I say self dot ID number, of course, is the ID number, if it wasn't already specified. But then we say self dot first equals, and then we have to say results and specify an index. The first index, or the 0th index, is the ID. So we are going to say results 1 for the first name, self dot last equals results 2, and the age will be results 3. So it should work that way, hopefully. And yeah, basically that's how we load a person. So now we have to execute this first, of course. So let's again copy that. It's a bit chaotic right now because I'm improvising this code here. I mean, it's kind of prepared, but the stuff with the ID, for example, was improvised, so it might lead to some errors, but I think it should work. Let's first of all delete the database. Table person at, okay, yeah, of course, we need to specify some values here for the ID because we now have an extra column. But other than that, it should work. So let's delete it. Yeah, now we have an ID column as well. And therefore, if we remove this code for now, what should work is that we create a new person object and then load it into the database. So the database already exists. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say P1 equals person. And this person has the ID, I don't know, 8. Or actually, no, actually I have to specify an empty person because let's just say -1 here for default values because I'm trying to load one. I'm not trying to insert one into the database. So I'm going to add some random values here and I'm going to say P1 equals person. And then I'm going to say P1 dot load person and pass the ID of Paul. This was 1. And then hopefully, if I print P1.first, it should be Paul. If everything worked out fine, this should be the case. Connection is not defined. Why is connection not defined? Of course, connection is not defined because I have to refer to self.connection. This is quite logical here. This makes sense, not a big deal. Then we have another mistake here, operational error, unrecognized token in line 4. Where is it? 14, sorry. Load person dot execute. I know why, because the format is out of the parentheses here. We're modifying the string, not the statement. Now it would work, yeah. So now we have Paul as we loaded Paul into the person, so I can also print the other values here. I can say p1.last and print, oh, not p2, sorry, p1.last, p1.h and p1 ID, actually ID number in this case. And then it should work. We got Paul Smith, 24 years old, and the ID is 1. So we successfully loaded an object from the database into the Python script as a Python object. Now we only have to do this the other way around as well. So we now have an object. Let's say we define an object here, P1 equals person, and we pass certain values. ID number will be 7. Then the first name will be, I don't know, Alex. And the last name will be, I'm very bad at improvising or brainstorming American last names, but let's just say, I really don't know, let's say Robbins, because of Tony Robbins. And then we say age equals 30. And this object right here, this Python object, we want to put it into the database as a row entry. And to do that, of course, we have to define a new function. We're going to say def insert person, and for this we're just going to insert. We don't need any specific parameters here because we're just going to take the object as it is and insert it into the database. So we're going to say cursor, or sorry, self.cursor dot execute, and we're going to execute the statement, which is insert into persons values, and then we're going to say placeholder, and placeholder. I think we only need 4 values, yes, and then we say format, and we pass self.id number, self.first, self.last, and self self.h. And of course, then we have to say self, or actually we have to say connection, self.connection.commit. And to check that, I need to somehow load it back, but let's just see if this works first. If we get any errors here, no, we don't get any errors, so probably the entry is already in there. And now to just check that, I'm going to make a quick select everything statement. So I'm going to define the connection here and a cursor here. And then I'm going to say cursor.execute select everything from persons. That's it. Then I'm going to say connection, or actually I'm going to say results equals cursor.fetch all. And we print the results and close the connection. This should work actually. Self is not defined. Self, of course. Yeah. No, doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? I insert person, I committed to the connection, but it does not get inserted into this. Maybe because I need to close the connection. Let's see if that solves the problem. Self.connection.close. Before we open a new one, I don't know. No, that's not the problem. Insert into person values. We enter all of that. We pass all of that. Does not work. Why doesn't it work? Okay, I figured out why it didn't work, because I'm stupid. I, of course, need to call the method so that it can work. So we're going to say insert person here. We cannot run, we cannot see results if we don't run the method. No such column Alex. Oh, all right. We have to specify this here as strings, because when we enter some, or when we pass something into the format function, we don't get Alex as a string. We get Alex. We get Alex as a string, but we don't get it with quotation marks. So in the statement itself, it does not have quotation marks, and it looks for a column named Alex. So we have to specify. For ID doesn't need to be the case, but for the first and the last name, I need to specify quotation marks here, because otherwise it's going to look for a row with that name. And now it works finally. As you can see, when we query out all the elements from person, we get Paul, Mark, Anna, and Alex Robbins here with the ID 7 and the age 30, as we defined him here in Python. So that's basically what you need to know about database programming in Python, at least when it comes to SQLite 3. Of course, as I said, we have modules for MySQL and MongoDB and so on, and all kinds of different databases. And also the queries were kind of simplistic today, because this tutorial here is a Python tutorial, it's not an SQL tutorial, so we didn't have any joins or subqueries or anything like that, anything complex, because we learned how to execute statements, SQL statements in Python, and you can use that to do all kinds of things in SQL. So if you need to learn SQL, go on Google, look it up, look up SQL tutorial. I bet you'll find something, and maybe I'm going to make some SQL tutorials in the future, who knows. So that's basically it when it comes to Python and database programming. So thank you very much for watching. Hit the like button if you liked the video. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more. Feel free to ask questions and give feedback in the comment section down below. And thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.